Okay, today in this one I wanted to talk about Bleach. I watched episode 1 again. I watched most of the show years ago, a while back. Basically, I've watched it all before, but it's been a good long time since I've seen it recently. And I kind of wanted to go back and at least watch the first episode. I might watch some more just to see how it is. One, for a nostalgia trip. Bleach is, for all the faults that it may have, it is a has fun. I have fond memories of everything. Ichigo getting Bankai and a bunch of other those great moments. It's kind of one of a good examples of a superpower type style manga that they've just done pretty well for it. But either way, wanted to talk about this and just highlight what the first episode does, because the first episode has a lot of work basically to do. Its job, it's got to pull the audience in. It's got to make them want more, and it's got to set up the characters. You've got to set up the world, and then you've got to set up a good question that the audience needs to answer, which is what happens next, basically. Because if they don't want to know what happens next, then they are going to stop watching, basically. And that's what you need to do. You need to make sure that you're coming up with an interesting enough question and setting the world up and all this other stuff, basically, to make sure that the audience wants to know what happens next, basically. So this is kind of the dynamic that the show begins with. So, or at least this is what the goals of the show are going to be, kind of to start with, because of course, obviously, you want to go to Bleach episode 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4 eyes and forms later, episode 600, and that's the goal. You at least want to keep the show running, keep it going. Without further ado, let's jump into it. So right now, what we've got is basically the show starts off with, we'll call it, ominous ooze or something like that. Basically, it's very ominous, very, very scary looking stuff. And basically, this is what I'd call is priming. This is where you tell the audience something will happen. And basically what you're telling them is something bad is going to be happening, because you can tell, because it's ominous ooze. Nothing good is going to be coming from ominous ooze, basically. So it starts this, and then it immediately switches from here, and we go into a normal life, basically. And this is kind of where, oops, let me get that here. Normal life, and then we introduce our hero, our main character. This is Ichigo Kurosawa. Ichigo, and basically the interesting thing about Ichigo, kind of comparing him to the other of the big three, which is Naruto, and we've got Luffy. I was going to say One Piece, but Luffy. Is that Ichigo? I forgot, actually, because it's been a good while since I've seen it, but Ichigo starts off as a kind of cool main character, basically. He's kind of one of the few characters who starts off kind of having it together, more or less. It's not like, Naruto kind of starts off as an airhead with nothing, basically. He's a nothing, he's a nobody, and he sucks. Basically, he's not talented. Luffy kind of starts off as an airhead, but with a dream. He's driven and determined, and I don't know, it was interesting, because I didn't really expect Ichigo to kind of seemingly have it together, because basically he starts off and he's beating up some thugs. He beats up thugs easily. That's the other interesting thing. He does it easily, so he's already powerful in his current form. So he beats them easily, and he comes across, we're basically introduced to him, and he's cool. He's strong, because a lot of these characters are introduced as being fairly weak. That's kind of the idea of their origin stories. They start off without a lot, so then they have to work into strength to then save the day. But he's already able to, so it's kind of cool. It's like, okay, cool. He's really strong. He has direction, basically. He's a fairly strong character when you kind of think of it. If you compare it to other main characters like Harry in Harry Potter, Harry doesn't have it all together. He doesn't really have this clear sense of directions, clear sense of right and wrong. He hasn't figured out stuff. He's kind of just awkward in there, and that's what makes Harry Harry as opposed to Ichigo. So it's just interesting. And same with Naruto, where he's kind of this much different character who's lacking just so much, basically, as far as from the world and other characters and everything. He doesn't have this sense of power or authority or confidence, basically. That's the other thing. Ichigo is confident, more or less, for it. Oops. Ichigo is very confident. Confident from there. And it's just interesting. I didn't remember that really happening at that point. So basically that's what we've got. And again, remember, we've got this priming. And priming is, telling an audience something's going to happen. So basically what it is we're then kind of living in the shadow of the priming, basically, because we're waiting for the ominous ooze, to kind of figure out what it means. We get introduced, and then as far as plot structure, we get introduced to Ichigo's family. We get to introduce, family life. They've got a loving family, with their quirky, wacky family dynamic. Let's see, dynamic from there. And we like the family. They're kind of normal. I mean, what do you expect? We've seen them for 2 seconds. We get to see his dad and then his 2 sisters. And then you get the idea that the mom is probably not dead, but like divorced maybe, or left them or something. You're not quite sure what the deal is basically for it. But anyway, you get introduced kind of the normal family dynamic, and then they see on the TV, you see, kind of to connect this down, ominous ooze down here, we see, attacks or something, basically, some ominous. I don't actually remember what's on the TV, but basically you can tell it's something good, some disaster, people dying or something, death. Basically not good. And then basically the next day, Ichigo's downtown. He sees more of these attacks basically from here. And then what you've got is you get to actually see the first hollow, as we later learn they're aren't named, but it's the demons, the monsters, basically, who are killing innocents, more or less. So they're running rampant, killing people. And so he helps save someone, and then we get introduced to we see a girl who we know as Rukia, who jumps in and saves the day with her samurai sword. We'll give it a little curve, because it's a samurai sword, so it's got a little curve to it, basically. So it's nice, and it works out. As far as plot goes, it works out pretty well, because basically what we've got is we kind of start off the show with the ominous ooze. We're going to call it the OO, basically. And this is kind of like, if you want to see it as a story arc, we're trying to figure out what the ominous ooze means. And basically, right when we figure out, it equals a monster, we basically have a question. We start with a question, and we have the question answered. Then we have another arc that happens, which is, it kind of goes into who is Rukia, or who is the girl, basically. So right as we figure out the answer to one question, we're asking another question. And this is a good way to kind of keep the plot going, because remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to pull the audience in. We need to have some way that they're continually engaged, because if they don't like your first episode, they're not going to like your show, period. Or at least you run the risk of that. I know it is always funny. I make fun of people who kind of go like, oh yes, the first 2 seasons are not too bad. You just got to get through them. And it's like, yeah, I'm not really doing that. I think the vast majority of people are going to watch one episode, and that's when you want, even if you get them late, or you want to get them with the first episode. So either way, that'll have it. So we get a Rukia, see her, and then she shows back up in Ichigo's room, and then we get introduced, and basically what we start seeing is the Rukia and Ichigo interaction, basically. And so we get to see a bit of their characters, we get some character development, get some humor, kind of get to see the dynamic. But also what we're realizing is the author is also setting up Ichigo. He's basically trying to set him up for see how powerful, prove power level, basically. Some sort of idea that we can see how powerful he is. Because we've got this thing. He can see ghosts and monsters, basically. And then they kind of have some interactions, and basically Rukia kind of proves her power over Ichigo, basically, because basically we're kind of setting up this, sort of box, basically, sort of deal that I've kind of talked about in others. So we have Ichigo down here, and then, you're aiming to go up here, and this is where Rukia is. And she does that by using some spell to immobilize him and keep him strong. So basically she proves that she's more powerful than him, and that's kind of where it ends. And then all of a sudden, bam, as luck would have it, hollow attack. Oops. Hollow attack. And this is good because basically as we're starting to answer this question of who Rukia is, she basically goes through and introduces, so there's the Soul Society, these are the rules, this is what happens. So as we start getting the answer to this question, we get another one that seems to seemingly kind of introduce. We get kind of another question of, Soul Society, basically. Wait, there's more? We start to see basically kind of whatever else is happening, and that kind of leads into this next question of what's going on with this world. And then as that's kind of building up, we get another upswing in action, which is, of course, the hollow attack. So basically the hollow attacks and does the, tries to kill sisters. Tries to kill the sisters, and this is a great way for engaging the audience. What you're trying to do is basically you're trying to make the trying to make the audience care about these characters, and it's always kind of tricky because the audience is kind of apathetic sometimes, can be. And so what you need to do is you need to pull them into the story, and basically, so what you do is you have this great setup, monsters trying to kill innocents, basically, and given these two sides, this is side one, this is side two. Who are you going to pick? Like, basically, who are you going to pick? And this is what this is kind of engaging the audience does. So, of course, when the audience picks this one, this is the one where the hero, works into to go ahead and try and save the day. Is because he's trying to save his sisters from getting eaten alive, more or less. And that seems to kind of, engage the audience, and you can kind of have that all work into its fact to where the audience then has to pick a side. Well, then the most important thing with this is then they care. It makes the audience care what happens, basically. Because once you pick a side, and this is, same for sports, anything, once you pick a side, you want to see, the most important question of who wins, which is really good because then the audience are going to continue to engage in the story, and they want to see what happens from here. So you can have that go from there. You can see, want to see who wins, and basically what we've got here is we have Rukia versus the Hollow. And actually, real quick, before I even jump into that, what we've got is we're basically a pretty good moment, interesting enough, where Ichigo is able to knock off the immobilization spell, and he gets to prove his power level, basically, because again, like I said, we've proved that Rukia is down here, but then once Ichigo breaks the spell, it basically removes him. We may not know if he's as strong as Rukia, but basically it means that he's not zero. He's not useless, basically. And this is interesting because we want to see what our main characters are capable of, especially when we thought we knew what was going on, but all of a sudden everything's changing. He's more powerful than we thought, basically, at that point. So we've got that, Rukia versus Hollow. She gets injured saving Ichigo, and then Ichigo then gets stabbed with the sword and becomes a Soul Reaper. Or a Shinigami, I think. Yeah, the original language. So he becomes a Soul Reaper, and then basically turns out he's even more powerful. And this is also really cool because we get to see our main character become powerful. And this is what a lot of the show actually focuses on, is basically you have the whole power levels, you have their bankais, basically, and all these great moments that the show really sets up is these different power levels for it, because we want to see it. And interesting enough, in the first episode, we basically kind of have two power levels. One main one with Ichigo becoming a Soul Reaper. Then he gets the Butcher Sword sort of thing. that he uses then to chop up some people. So I don't know if this is quite like a Guts, Berserk callback or call reference or anything like that. But he's got his sword, and he kills the monster. And then the episode ends, basically, at that point. End. And that's the basics of this first episode. Because basically what we've got is we're trying to create and craft a show, or an intro episode to a show that pulls the audience in, introduces the characters, introduces the world, kind of makes the audience choose, we might not have really had this thought, just to give you guys an example for engaging the audience. We didn't know that we cared about the sisters until we thought they may die. And that's what you're doing with the show, is what you're trying to do. You're trying to make the audience think, oh, I actually care what happens to these people, and then therefore care what happens next, basically. Because you want to make sure the audience is continually wanting to know what happens next. And this is what it is. So yeah, it was a really good intro episode. You can kind of see how people begin to pull it in. Of course, it ends on quite kind of a cliffhanger. It could have ended on much more of a cliffhanger with something else, but basically we get to see this power up. We get to see Ichigo kind of prove himself. And then we have questions of course, what happens next. And it was well done. It's all around fairly well done of a story, and to see what all kind of the story goes from there. Because basically we kind of have this chain from here, and then we've got the fight with the other monster, and I'm running out of space. But basically then, you fight the monster, you got to kill the monster, and then Ichigo becomes a soul reaper. But then this part where the episode ends, and then we've got to watch episode 2 to figure out what happens. And each question, each plot point kind of ties into the other. So no, it's really done really well. So yeah, hope you guys learned something, and I will see you in the next one.